Now back to Kotaro's tale.
When you think about the PS3 and the titles that are typically associated with it, you'd probably come to think of some sort of gritty, mature-rated games. Probably a first-person shooter of some sort with a single-player campaign and a tacked-on multiplayer mode. While these games would certainly define the era, there were still plenty of titles coming out for other genres. But if I had to think about what types of people were suffering the most this generation, I would probably have to assume it's fans of 2D platformers. From the mid-2000s to the early 2010s, if you wanted to play a 2D platformer game, it would probably be coming from Nintendo. There were a few other 2D games coming out at the time, but most of them were on Wii or DS. Enter Puppeteer, a 2D platforming game made for the PS3 in fall 2013. Aside from the Little Big Planet trilogy, this was really the only major side-scrolling game that was exclusive to the PS3. But this one, like many of Japan Studios' games, was very quirky and experimental and didn't really capture that broad audience that it needed to succeed. Despite reviewing pretty well at release, it quickly faded into obscurity because the PS4 was just about to come out. I had a PS3 at the time and I didn't even hear about this thing until just a few years ago when I started collecting more games for the system. I've heard that it's considered somewhat of a hidden gem for the PS3 and it reviewed so well back in the day, so I was curious to check it out for myself. So in this video, I thought we'd take a dive into the world of Puppeteer for the good old PS Triple.
Come one, come all, to the most phenomenal, most extraordinary, most unimaginable puppet show you've ever experienced.
Puppeteer sets you right into the story. The entire game is set and themed around a magical theater and a puppet show, and it tells the story of a goddess that ruled the moon realm, who was eventually betrayed by a bear that shattered their all-powerful moonstone and stole their magic scissors known as Calibris. Since then, the Moon Bear King has taken over as a tyrant, ruling the moon realm, stealing away the souls of children from Earth in order to maintain his power. Now the story begins with a boy named Kotaro. The Moon Bear King devours his head to claim his soul, and the body is thrown away. That's you. Kotaro meets the Moon Witch's cat named Yin Yang, who guides him out of the castle and helps him find a new head in order to survive.
Oh, what a little darling! Welcome! Please make yourself at home. Go and bring him to me!
I can't say I expected to know what the story was going to be about, but I also didn't expect there to be so much information all at once. Everything I just said happens in the first 5 minutes of the game, and I really had to just rewatch my footage to actually get a grasp about what's going on here.
There before our hero towered the most impressive pair of scissors you've ever seen, the legendary Calibris.
Exposition and extra dialogue is provided by a narrator, which is a real character in the in-game universe that can interact directly with the puppets. This is all to say that when you're in a level, there's a lot of conversation being had.
From the booby trap he just set off,
The squash are out to squish.
with the legendary Calibris firmly in hand.
Look at all those Eggman robots!
A lot of the times in my playthrough, I would be focused on the platforming or level, and I just wouldn't really pay attention to what people were saying. Not that it really matters, but there's a lot of backstory and dialogue going on that you could miss. Thankfully, some of it you can find in unlockable storybooks, and eventually I turned on the subtitles to help a little bit with that.
I still don't trust you.
The gameplay in I keep saying the Puppeteer, but it's just Puppeteer. The gameplay in Puppeteer is pretty similar to many platformers you've probably played before, with a couple of unique ideas. In terms of the controls, there's a weightiness that you could probably take some time to get used to. Kotaro can't jump very high, but he can climb over ledges, which is nice. But soon you'll get the scissors, and that becomes your main method of travel. You'll learn to use Calibris to not only cut up enemies, but also to cut along sheets or papers to move through the levels. It can be a bit slow at times, and every once in a while I'd get kind of stuck in the air cutting, but it is a really fun and creative way to get around. Similarly to the Little Big Planet games, there's a bit of stiffness that can get in your way as you're trying to get around. It's not something that hurt my experience to an extreme degree, but it probably would put off some people when they first start the game. One thing you might have already noticed is that the cute little Kuduro on the cover of the game isn't really here. Since the Moon Bear King ate his head right at the beginning of the game, Kuduro has to substitute for other heads that you find in every level, and these function sort of as a health bar and collectible. If you take damage, the head flies around and gives you a chance to recover it. If you've played the Kirby games, it's a lot like when you lose your copy ability. While I think that it's an easy way to keep things simple, I found that it was almost impossible to keep your head if you got hit during a platforming segment. And Puppeteer loves to do these scripted levels where you have to escape from some big thing, and it can be hard to avoid taking a stray hit.
You know, a new kid on the chopping block like you ought to have a couple of noggins at least.
This isn't a terrible issue because you can carry 3 heads at a time, but it does sort of work in a negative way with the other side of the head mechanic. Each head has a little taunt animation that you can use to open up bonus levels or get extras, but you have to keep that corresponding head to activate them. Very frequently, I would lose a head accidentally by overwriting it, and I just miss out on those bonus sections. It's technically my fault, but there isn't really any way for me to know what head I would need later on. This led to a lot of moments where I was scared to lose or overwrite certain heads and felt forced to use ones that I just didn't really like that much. They don't change the gameplay or controls or anything, but I was just kinda annoyed that I have to be stuck with some ugly head in an effort to protect the ones I like. I didn't really expect this mechanic to be so important to the game, but I guess they can't really explain it on the cover. There are about 100 heads to collect in the game, but I never actually found where that lion was.
Guess I didn't give you enough credit. You're like a hero or something, right?
Making your way through the first act, you'll find and rescue the Sun Princess Picarina before fighting the first major boss, the Tiger. There are a lot of characters in this game, and most of them end up as boss encounters. They're a lot of fun for the most part, though a lot of them follow that Zelda method of just using the last thing you got in order to win. In Act 1, you use this shield power-up that you picked up earlier to defeat the Tiger. Once you do enough damage to a boss, Kuduro and Calibris will get powered up and do a takedown animation. One thing to note, being a PS3 60 era game, this one uses some QTEs. These aren't difficult by any means, but I'm pretty glad that QTEs just died out after this generation. It's not a big deal, but it's always so lame when you mess up a button prompt and then just lose all momentum in the scene. You just sit there awkwardly resetting this animation. But I was kind of surprised how violent these things get. Like, you completely butcher this tiger. You take him apart tooth by tooth, claw by claw. It's almost to the point where I kind of felt bad for him. And a few levels later, he's a rug. But the tiger is just the beginning. You'll take out a kraken, a dragon, and even a giant enemy crab. And they knew what they were doing. With Act 1 cleared, Kuduro and Picarina escape the Moonbear's castle and set out to recover the 12 moonstones from each of his generals.
You'll never be safe, ever!
Every general, including Tiger, are actually based off of the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac. I couldn't tell you why, I don't really know enough about these things, but I just happened to notice. From here on out, the structure of Puppeteer is pretty simple. Kuduro and Picarina travel from one location to another, gaining an upgrade in every act that helps you defeat each of the generals. Sometimes you'll fight multiple generals in one act, and sometimes you'll fight 2 of them at the same time, but it's all pretty much the same. Thankfully, the stages are pretty varied and do a good job of coming up with new fun ways to use each mechanic that you get. In terms of the upgrades you get, there aren't that many standouts in my opinion, except for maybe the scissor upgrade that lets you go faster. This one felt unintentionally powerful in a way that let you outpace a lot of areas.
Adios, you pesky house.
Something I failed to mention is that Picarina isn't just a side character, and she's actually playable simultaneously with the right stick. You move her around like a pointer and then use a button to interact with whatever's on screen. Most of the time, this is just used to interact with background objects for collectibles. It's a fun mechanic, but it really tests your multitasking skills. It was pretty easy to be messing around in the foreground as Kuduro and then miss a detail in the background with Picarina. This mechanic might seem a little bit strange, but it does also allow you to make use of the PS Move controller. Japan Studios games were often experimenting with whatever new hardware peripherals Sony was putting out at the time. So this late into the PS3 generation, they had access to the PS Move and the then new 3D TVs. And let me tell you, they really want you to know this game's in 3D.
What the? Jeremy Timber!
The overuse of peripherals can often make games pretty gimmicky, but in this case, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Gimmick can often be taken as a sign of shallowness in games, but sometimes I think the developers are just trying to try new stuff. With Puppeteer, it seems the game was made with the Move controllers and 3D in mind, and then adjusted to be playable with a standard setup. I have a suspicion that Puppeteer maybe took longer to make than they had originally planned, because it doesn't even have the PS Move or 3D TV icons on the box. For the most part, this game works just fine in single player, but the co-op adds Piccarina as a second player, which you can use with the Move. For some reason though, Puppeteer doesn't have support for the Navigator controller, as far as I could tell, which is kinda ridiculous. It means that in single player, you can't really have the best of both worlds. I think the game would work really well if Piccarina was on a pointer controller and Kuduro was controlled with a stick. Puppeteer is funny to me because it feels like a Wii game that was lost on the platform and somehow ended up on the PS3 4 years after everyone stopped caring. I think that if this one was released by Nintendo in, say, 2009 or 10, it probably would be considered a way better game than it is now. Either way, a lot of this stuff adds up to make Puppeteer's peripheral support feel a little bit like a missed opportunity.
What just happened? Kataro, come back! Oh, that's gotta hurt.
If I had to be honest though, I don't think the gameplay is Puppeteer's greatest strength. It doesn't have the fun movement of the later Rayman games or Sonic games, and it doesn't really have that gameplay variety that you find in Mario. Most of Kuduro's abilities are contextual and don't really add that much depth to the moment-to-moment gameplay. It's a very monkey see, monkey do style of design where bombs go on the bomb targets, and so on. I did appreciate every once in a while when they would make you rethink how to use these tools, but Piccarina and the narrator will often just tell you what to do. Puppeteer certainly has its moments when you get to use these abilities in conjunction with each other, but I really think that the bulk of the value comes from the world and the story. Generally speaking, I think the levels worked best when they were creating these sort of scenarios that were relevant to the story at hand. The narrator, the characters, and the story are really what are driving the adventure here. If you can't get along with how the writing is done and the humor, then you're probably not going to get along with Puppeteer on the gameplay alone. I wasn't losing it from any of the jokes here, but the characters all have a lot of personality to them, which I respect.
Oh, late, I am late!
He looks shady. Let's tail him.
Let's take a minute to properly talk about the art style and visual design of Puppeteer. From the start, I really liked how they handled the menus. Everything in the Puppeteer is vaguely diegetic. That is to say, it's all part of its in-game universe. Everything exists as part of the magical theater that it sets up. 90% of the time, the curtains of the stage are visible and characters move in and out of the set. All of the menus function as real parts of the stage, including a globe world map that shifts around and a collection screen with little boxes for each of the heads you collect. The entire game is presented with these wooden structures that shake and shift around, like they're all attached to gears and pulleys. And in the cutscenes, the characters will move and bounce around the stage in a way that allows them to reset it between transitions. I love the attention to detail when characters shift perspective, with the entire set shaking as it moves around. It's all a really cool concept, and while some things obviously don't move like a real puppet, it is part of that magical theater that they're presented in. A lot of the time, the sets feel like one big piece, where it's spiraling around a singular column, or made of one part of an area like a diorama. Even if the levels scroll in a way that doesn't really make sense, you can always see the gears on the bottom of the screen spinning as they try to catch up with you. Some parts can look generic at times, but some level themes have really spectacular sections. Really, my biggest issue with the visual design in Puppeteer is that it never got a chance to be ported forward to future generations. I'm usually not one to say that every old game needs to be dragged into 4K at 60 frames per second, but I really think this game would have benefited from a port at least to PS4. A lot of darker levels get lost in the 720p resolution, and there are just a lot of small details that could have used a bump in fidelity. Especially with how abundant they use motion blurring, I think Puppeteer would look a lot better at a higher resolution. The PS3 is a 1080p console on the surface, but really most of the games it ran were going at 720p, and very few games would run at 1080p without some sacrifice. Really, this whole generation had problems with graphics and technical issues, but the art style in Puppeteer is worth presenting in a higher resolution. Heads up for some ending spoilers. Not really like you're missing that much, but if you want, you can skip below. Once you reach the second to last act, it's revealed that the Moon Witch was looking to take the moon shards for herself in order to overthrow the Moon Bear King. When the Moon Bear King hears about this, they take her away and trap her in the castle. With all of the stones collected though, Kuduro can put them all back into the White Castle. By doing so, the memories return to the Moon Witch, and it's revealed that she was the goddess the whole time. With the two castles at war, Kuduro and Picarina break into the bear's castle just as he's powering up, trying to swallow as many souls as he can from Earth.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the toughest guy of all?
You know who the strongest is. Kotaro!
I actually really enjoyed these last few levels. It felt like there was a fitting challenge that lets you use all of the tools you've earned at that point in the game. Even if the head mechanic can trivialize certain moments by letting you damage your way through, it was still a really engaging section that had a lot going on. The pirate guy from the earlier acts returns because he's in love with the Moon Witch and helps you by sending you over to take apart the castle one piece at a time. All of that leads to a final encounter with the Moon Bear King, which does just play out like every other boss in the game. You use all of the abilities you've earned at that point and tear the guy down stitch by stitch.
Was in tatters. He hardly looked like a king at all now.
You'd think that by the time he's reduced to just a head, he would have given up at that point, but it's not the case.
'Tis but a scratch.
You do one last QuickTime event, and that's the end of Puppeteer.
What was it?
Oh, yes!
It turns out after everything that the Moon Bear King was just a little teddy bear that needed some friends. Finally though, he learns his lesson and the two sides of the stone are put back together. Kuduro says goodbye to everybody and is allowed to return back to Earth with his soul intact, and the Moon Realm returns to peace. I also really like how they do the credits here, where you can smash the button to go faster. There are 7 acts in total, and I think for the first maybe 2 or 3, I wasn't really feeling it, I wasn't really getting into it, but after you unlock a few more of those abilities and the story gets going, I think Puppeteer finds its footing really well. Japan's studio was willing to try new things in an industry that really moved on from the genre this game was built around, and it brings an energy and excitement that I think is all its own. The character writing can be a bit dated at times, with Picarina constantly pointing out the obvious and expecting that to just be a funny joke, but it's clear that the team working on this story had a great time with it. The writing can be charming at times, and it doesn't really feel too obtrusive. If you counted all of the most popular games from the PS3, I guarantee that almost all of them feature some sort of stoic main guy that looks cool and shoots people. While I do think Puppeteer has some merit where it's due, I do think that if you took it out of the context it belongs from, it probably wouldn't have earned the same praise. But that isn't to say it has no value anymore. Puppeteer isn't really a perfect game, but I think that it's a shining light in a sea of military shooters from around that time. Nowadays we get flooded with tons of creative indie platformers, so it's hard to remember what it was like just a few years ago. Something like Puppeteer might feel a little bit simple, but in 2013 it was more of a breath of fresh air. I think with the right person at the right time, Puppeteer could have been a really captivating experience.
Alright, another one in the bag.
I hope you enjoyed this one, and thanks for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel. I'm usually covering more nostalgic and retro titles with a lean on more niche games like Puppeteer. I'd love to know in the comments below if you've played this one before, but if you haven't, let me know what are the best PS3 or 360 2D platformers. That generation was like a desert for platformers, and I can't really remember playing many more of them other than Little Big Planet or Mega Man 9. Sonic 4 maybe? It wasn't looking good out there. With that said, I am out of things to say, so goodbye, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.